share the stage today with Dr. Matt Soldner and Dr. Erwin Gianchandani. Matt is the acting director of IES, and his areas of expertise include the use of rigorous evidence to improve education policy and the implementation of evaluation efforts. Is if one job isn't enough, he also serves as the commissioner of NCEE and the chief evaluation officer of the Department of Ed. And Erwin is the National Science Foundation's assistant director for technology, innovation, and partnerships, or TIP. He leads the TIP Directorate, which is working to foster innovation ecosystems, accelerate technology, translation, and development, and to grow the STEM workforce. We're so grateful to have you both today joining us to celebrate education R&D and to talk a little bit more about the importance of collaboration across the federal level and how that can support a robust and well-developed ecosystem of innovation at the state and local levels as well, so that every classroom is impacted by our work. I'd love to have you both introduce yourself and share a little bit about your agency's priorities, your vision for your respective departments, and any reactions or reflections you had to the last conversation.
Yeah, sure. Hey everybody, it's great to see you here. As Melissa said, my name is Matt Soldner. I'm the acting director of IES. I know some of you are a bit newer to the conversation, so I don't want to assume that you all have equal knowledge as to what IES even is. I'm about to dump a lot of acronyms on you, so I feel it's incumbent upon me to tell you what I'm talking about before I do. So if you don't know, IES is the Institute of Education Sciences. We are the Department of Education's research, statistics, R&D, and evaluation branch. And we are structured such that we have 4 centers. Our National Center for Education Statistics, you might have heard, for example, of NAEP, our nation's report card. We have 2 centers, our National Center for Education Research and Special Education Research, who fund field-initiated R&D. And then we have the National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance, the center that I lead, which in addition to evaluating federal programs, funds programs like the Regional Educational Labs and the Works Clearinghouse. And let me say, wherever Carrie Wright is, that $100 I paid you to mention the RELs in your comments will be slipped under your chair shortly. No, I did not pay for that, but I appreciate it. So that's IES in a nutshell. Really simply, so we can get to our questions, my vision for IES is really consistent, I think, with what you heard from our panels. Going forward, I see IES as a central architect in a R&D ecosystem for education that is truly inclusive, truly innovative, and truly responsive, right, to the needs of our learners, our educators, our families, and our communities.
Great. So good morning, everybody. I'm Erwin Gianchandani, as Melissa said, and I have the pleasure and the honor of serving as the Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships at the National Science Foundation. So I help lead the TIP Directorate at the National Science Foundation, which is a relatively new entity that was stood up just a couple of years ago with support from Congress as part of the CHIPS and Science Act legislation. So it's authorized in the and science part of CHIPS and Science, and we're still waiting on the appropriations to come through, but with time, we hope. So for those of you who don't know NSF as well, I think there are a lot of folks, I recognize a lot of familiar faces in the room, and surely there are some folks who are still somewhat new to the National Science Foundation. We've been around for 75 years. It'll be 75 years next year, as a matter of fact. We help support the frontiers of science, engineering, and education in all areas of STEM. Some common examples of those of you walking around with smartphones and tablets, which is pretty much all of us. Every single component on that device has its roots in basic research that's been funded by the National Science Foundation and other federal agencies too, but funded by the National Science Foundation going back many decades. So whether it be the touchscreen interface, whether it be the GPS connectivity, whether it be the wireless connections, all of that has its roots in NSF funded research dating back decades. So we like to think that we contribute to economic growth, economic competitiveness, and also solutions to some of the pressing societal challenges that we face at any given time as well. NSF historically has had a directorate for STEM education. It used to be called the Directorate for Education and Human Resources. Recently, we adapted the name to STEM education. That directorate really is a leader across the federal government. It has collaborated with IES and other parts of the federal government as well when it comes to trying to enable STEM education research trying to really be able to understand more effectively how do we think about the pedagogical approaches, the technological approaches, both in formal and informal settings. And then there's also some investment from STEM education, some non-insignificant investment, I might add, that goes toward fellowships and scholarships and the actual act of training talent at all levels and in all different socioeconomic statuses as well. My director within TIP, coming back to sort of the vision that we have for TIP and NSF more generally, but my director within TIP, relatively new, but our mission, our mandate from Congress really is to be able to try to harness the talent that exists all across this country. My director, Dr. Erwin Gianchandani, likes to say that NSF is known for being able to harness the geography of innovation and the demography of innovation that exists across the United States, because it's incumbent upon us to be able to create opportunities everywhere, because there really is talent and innovation potential just about anywhere in the US. And so with that as sort of a backdrop, we have put a particular focus out of TIP on thinking about how do we meet people where they are? How do we try to touch talent regardless of location, regardless of socioeconomic status, and regardless of degree status. So you could be a high school student, you could be in the workforce today without a high school diploma or without a college degree. That's okay. You may become excited by some of the conversation that we've been having even this morning about AI or wireless or biotechnology, some of these key technologies that are driving today and tomorrow and the future of this nation. And so how do we give you those experiential opportunities? How do we give you the incentives and the cues and the resources to be able to pivot into some of these high-tech trade spaces, even if you might not already be in one, so that you can look for that better quality, higher wage job of today and tomorrow that we can enable. So that's just a little bit about NSF and TIP, and hopefully we can get into it. But I will note that, as Matt hinted at earlier, IES and NSF have a long-standing track record of collaborating with one another. Hopefully we'll talk about some of that, Melissa, as well. And I think we're really looking forward and excited to be able to build upon that as we go into the future.
That's awesome, and we definitely will get to the collaboration. I'd love to start with the STEM thread. As many of us read in the news very regularly, the U.S. faces increasing global competition in critical areas of science, technology, and innovation that are essential for our economic prosperity and also national security. At the same time, we have indicators like the nation's report card that show that STEM literacy for all of our K-12 students is not where it should be or could be, which raises concerns about our future workforce capabilities and also in these vital fields in particular. We know that sustained and robust investment in education R&D is critical to supporting STEM disciplines and supporting all students to be successful in STEM. And I'd love for you to help us understand how have some of the investments in education R&D from your respective agencies helped to lead to changes in classroom practices and meaningful improvement in STEM learning outcomes for students.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa, and thanks, Erwin. So Erwin's right, we have collaborated for more than a decade. And that collaboration is particularly urgent now, given some facts that Melissa alluded to in her intro. If you think just about science proficiency nationally, despite our 10 years of collaboration, the results aren't where we want them to be. If you look at, for example, at our most recent NAEP scores and our science assessment administered in 2019, over 40% of 12th graders, perform below NAEP Basic. That number rises to 50% when we look at Hispanic students, 70% when we look at African American students. Conversely, only 2% of our students at the 12th grade level are at that NAEP advanced level. And so it's probably not surprising that when you talk to 12th graders as part of NAEP, only a third say they enjoy STEM, and more than half say they're not likely or not at all likely, to pursue a career in the STEM fields. So we will have new data coming out in the coming year on 8th graders in STEM, and I would love to say that I believe those numbers will be different. The one time I will be maybe less than upbeat in my comments today is right now. I promise to you, science proficiency has been stagnant or declining since 2009. So I think we should be circumspect about what we'll see in those numbers. So this problem of flagging proficiency, the need to craft an R&D system that is more responsive to these needs and can reverse the trend does feel urgent. This isn't, Melissa, just because we're coming off the global pandemic we heard about before and that we're seeing scores decline generally, particularly in underserved populations. more so, this need to make a change, I think, is motivated because we have an incredible opportunity we've been presented, and we cannot afford to squander it, right? So as a nation, we have chosen to make more and larger, kind of dollar terms, investments in the nation's long-term competitiveness and our national security than ever before. As Erwin said, they run the gamut of the STEM portfolio. It includes AI, it includes clean energy, it includes semiconductors, pandemic preparedness, and all the rest. But if we're going to realize that moment and kind of turn those dollars into progress, we have to have this increasing levels of science and math proficiency amongst our students. So to be sure, there is work that we can do ahead, but if we can achieve those goals, we'll become not just more prosperous as a nation and more secure as a nation, but also better able to secure the well-being of individuals and families and the communities in which they live and work. And I do believe that this inclusive system of R&D that we're going to talk about is the way there. I can talk a lot about our collaborations. I don't know if we want to get into those yet or if we want to...
Go for it.
Yeah, all right. So,
Go for it.
I mean, I am convinced this collaboration that we have been soaking these years that leverages our distinctive mission really is key. We do have a long history of working together. I think we can build upon those. I will let Erwin talk about the AI institutes because I feel like the AI work is really kind of NSF's forte. But you know, for more than a decade, we've been thinking about this problem. A decade ago, we released the Common Guidelines for Education, Research, and Development, which was meant to improve the quality of STEM research nationally. And it talked about what the division of labor for this collaboration was meant to look like between NSF and IES. Really making it clear that NSF's role was in this basic science work and this development work of instructional materials that can be used in formal and informal settings, making clear that IES's role was the design and rigorous testing of educational materials, policies, programs, and practices that could be placed in schools and, of course, rigorously evaluated. And we still do that today. We have 3 great projects going on together. The AI Institutes are 2 of them. I'll let Erwin speak of them. But something you might be less familiar with is something that I'm particularly excited about. It's our Improving Outcomes in Elementary Science Education R&D Center. So applicants for that R&D Center who are successful will be announced this summer. So if you or your friends have applied, you don't have too much longer to wait to hear how that's going to turn out. They will start work together in the fall. And the elevator pitch for this work is really simple. Although science-focused instructional materials abound, not nearly enough is known about which ones of those effectively work for students and improve science achievement outcomes. So whereas you will hear in a second, IES is really tapping into NSF's expertise in AI through our institutes. Through this joint R&D center between NCER and NSF, we'll be extending the value of NSF's investments in science-focused instructional materials by bringing our unique skill set to the table. So our community of education scientists are really uniquely prepared, I think, to bring both high-quality measurement of science proficiency and the ability to develop really high-quality impact studies to see which of these interventions are really going to move the needle inside this space. And so I'm very excited to see what this work will grow into over the next 5 years and the partnership we have with them.
Cool. So I'm just going to build on some of what Matt just described. A couple of things that I'll say. Let me first answer the first question that you posed, Melissa, about what are some examples, right? What are some example success stories? I think historically at NSF, our colleagues in the STEM Education Directorate have really been leaders with IES and others around how do we conduct that R&D? How do we bring education researchers together with practitioners at the end of the day to be able to better shape the challenges and the pain points, and then based off of those better understand what are some of the research-based solutions to those. And we do that at all levels, and we do that also at all different institution types. So for example, I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost in the conversation or ends up being secondary in the conversation is thinking about HBCUs and MSIs and other diverse institutions, emerging research institutions, for example. How do we help grow capacity at those institutions to be able to train the talent that we want to train? How do we provide the trainings for the faculty and the instructors and the teaching? Not to mention then what are the innovations that we want to introduce in the classroom setting? Having said that, I'm going to give you one concrete example, because sometimes when you reel off like 4 or 5 people tend to
feel like you're just droning on. So I'm going to give you one concrete example that I am particularly excited about. How many of you know the CS for All story? You know this, yes. How many of you don't know the CS for All story? Raise your hands. Yeah, there's quite a few, right? So this is an investment by the National Science Foundation that goes back about 14 years ago. NSF at the time, we were administering through the College Board's Advanced Placement Program. The College Board was administering Computer Science A, CSA exam for students and talent all across the country. Turns out the numbers weren't that great. Turns out especially the numbers of women, blacks, and Hispanics were pretty dreadful in terms of who was taking that exam and who was going into computer science in the first place at the high school setting. And by the way, I think as a lot of evidence-based and literature shows, the earlier you engage students, the more likely you are to draw them in, excite them, and then it's about keeping them excited and engaged going forward. But if you try to teach, I have a computer science degree, but if you were to try to teach me computer science now and I had no computer science background, I think it's pretty much a lost cause, right? So you have to start early. So one of the realizations by bringing together education researchers as well as computer science teachers as well as computer science researchers, one of the realizations was how you teach computing can have a transformational impact on who you can actually engage, right? And so in the process, there was an effort, it was a $10 million effort altogether. Think about the budget of the National Science Foundation, $9 billion annually. Think about the budget of IES. Think about the federal budget, right? We're talking about a $10 million investment to essentially develop the framework for how you teach, not to code, right? Because that's not necessarily very exciting and inspiring. But how do you take real world problems and how do you transform them into thinking about them from a computational lens, right? So it's teaching computational thinking, not necessarily teaching computational code, right? And so this AP exam framework ultimately led to coursework, instructional material, as well as pedagogical approaches tied to that too, and was ultimately deployed all across the country at high schools throughout the United States. The first year that the AP Computer Science Principles exam was administered was 2016-2017. In that first year, in spring of 2017, 55,000 students took the AP CSP exam. 55,000 may not seem like a lot, but 55,000 was the single largest launch of an AP exam in the College Board's 60-year history at the time. The number of blacks, the number of Hispanics, the number of women test takers doubled relative to what it was previously. Today, more than 150,000 students take that exam every year, and the numbers of African American, Hispanic, and female test takers have tripled relative to where they were previously. That is a testament to research, that's a testament to education research, that's a testament to thinking about bringing together researchers and practitioners to co-design solutions to some of the pressing challenges that we have in the classroom setting. I personally have always been inspired by this story and inspired by the folks at NSF and elsewhere who helped shape the realization of this story. So that's the first part that I wanted to just kind of touch on in terms of real world changes and transformations. And this goes back a decade, but I think it's still having a profound impact on who all is thinking about AI, who all is thinking about quantum, who all is thinking about AI-driven biotechnological innovation, et cetera, going forward. Now, Matt, you mentioned the collaboration that we have between IES and NSF, and I will emphasize, and this is something that was inspired through your leadership, also the previous director of IES, who I saw in the audience there, Mark is here, developing this collaboration around the National AI Research Institutes program. So the AI Institutes program at NSF is about trying to be able to support the frontiers of research and innovation all across the country, bringing together coalitions of the willing. So we have funded, for instance, 25 AI institutes to date. Each one receives $20 million over the course of a 5-year timeline. Those 25 AI institutes, the number of organizations that are involved in those institutes, including academic institutions, community colleges, technical schools, state and local governments, private industry, etc., more than 150 organizations involved in those 25 AI institutes across the country. And 2 of them are specifically enabled by co-funding IES providing resources and NSF providing resources that Congress has appropriated to each of our organizations to support AI in the education spaces, right? So one example that I'll highlight is AI for Exceptional Ed. That's the name of the AI Institute. And that one in particular is trying to think about children who have speech and language processing challenges, right? And so what are AI-based innovations that we can design and develop? It's not just about an AI tutor, to the comments from the previous session, right? But this is about how do we harness AI technologies to really be able to change the manner in which students can grasp new concepts, can engage with new concepts, and can engage with one another as well, especially if they have coming into the room speech and language barriers themselves that they face, which is a much bigger problem than I think we recognize or acknowledge on a day-to-day basis. And so the goal here is to try to be able to sort of enable universal early screening so that we can get to a better place faster with students. And secondly, also to then be able to provide those personalized, individualized interventions for students and talent who have these speech and language challenges that they face on a daily basis. This is what we mean when we say meet people where they are, when we say we really want to be able to ensure that everybody has an opportunity. You may have a speech impairment coming in, but can we transform that, and can we actually help you engage or even help you overcome that speech impairment going forward? And this is an effort, by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, led by colleagues at the University of Buffalo and a whole team orchestrated across upstate New York and the Northeast to help make this possible, and across the country.
Amazing. Thank you for telling the CS for All story. I think both of your remarks really underscore what is possible when we invest in education R&D. Big things can happen even with modest investments when they are directed and very specific, and when we leverage the best of what each agency and each constituency and stakeholder has to offer. So that's what we're talking about here. Big things happening that truly are trajectory changing for individual students and families and communities. And I'm excited about what's possible with the many faces in the room as we all work together towards that reality. Let's look ahead a little bit, not to ask you to be a futurist the same way as Richard, but I am, you all are sitting in conversations thinking about what's next and what's possible. As you look to the future of education R&D, what developments or possibilities are you most excited about? Or any cautionary tales that as we move forward, we should really take under advisement?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I want to underscore just a few things I've heard today, and it kind of gives me some hope for our kind of future efforts. First, I really want to underscore how important it is that we pick up on this thread Erwin began and centering the needs of learners and educators in that work. I think that the future does not include that. We will be missing the boat. Most all of us know this dictum, right, begin with the end in mind. And the end in mind I have for us in this collaboration, this work together, is an education ecosystem that is full of interventions that we know are effective and that both teachers and students want to actually see in use in the classroom. And I think to achieve that end and to reach that place, there is no way, no path there that isn't rooted in the learning sciences. It doesn't take into account the assets and preferences and needs of students and educators, and doesn't really leverage rigorous research to show what works and improve what works. As a field, we haven't quite yet coalesced around what this engagement means, but I look forward to figuring that with you all. I know if we don't begin to do that work now and infuse that work with the voices of students and families, those who the learning sciences and the education sciences are meant to benefit, it seems unlikely we'll reach our final goals. When I think about the future of the research model, we really need to begin to test ways of working together that can yield some really game-changing insights. If only we are willing to take a few greater risks. So a few questions to ponder. Can we make a few small investments in an emergent, if speculative space with the hopes that one of those might yield something transformational? Can we demand less specificity from our researchers who are coming in, giving them more latitude to explore, knowing that sometimes that exploration might lead to what appears to be not, but sometimes might find the thing that is truly game-changing or make a difference for students? Can we bring in new research and development partners? One of the most important things I think about the AI institutes, beyond kind of building our muscle memory for collaboration, is that through this collaboration, we are able to reach AI innovators, other researchers who have skills that NCES and IES would never ordinarily tap. We're bringing them into the fold. We're allowing them to apply these kind of cutting edge skills to issues of educational practice and equity in ways they never would have before. So can we bring those new partners into the fold? Can we partner them with education scientists who know about the learning sciences, who know about rigorous evaluation? And through that partnership, will we find things that can be done better together that could never be done separately? So those questions that we're wrestling with are all part of what we call our ATS, or Accelerate, Transform, Scale portfolio at IES. I know many of you have heard of our work, a new project called From Seedlings to Scale. I had sincerely hoped I would walk in here today and be able to talk to you about all things S2S, as we call it. We're not quite there yet, but if you check back this time next week, I hope we'll have more information that we can share. But in short, looking to the future, I'm incredibly optimistic. If you look at the great work both agencies have done individually, when you think about the potential of collaboration and the kind of multiplicative effect of that, I think we're really well positioned.
So I would just say +1 to everything that Matt just said. I'm going to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, although I'll repeat one point that you made, which I could not agree with more. So in terms of sort of next steps, or in terms of things that I think we are trying to keep our pulse on, to some extent, Melissa, I think first and foremost, I hinted at this in the context of the CS for All story, and even in the context of the AI Institutes, but I think it is absolutely critical that anything that we do, we increasingly think about this in the context of, and forgive me for the researchers in the room, not just research for research's sake, but really let's bring the practitioners to the table to help give rise to the research questions that we want to ask, right? So how do we get the teachers, the faculty, the instructors, those who have frontline experiences, how do we build those sort of researcher-practitioner partnerships? I think that is so critical to making sure that we have the spotlight on what it is that we need to have the spotlight on at any given moment in time, especially given the fact that resources are so precious, right, at the end of the day. I think the second thing I would say is, we have an example here of IES and NSF working together within the federal government. I think there are folks in the room who come from a variety of different backgrounds, including philanthropic backgrounds, for instance. I think there are opportunities for us to be able to seize potential for collaboration that's across sectors. So how do our agencies, for instance, collaborate with philanthropic ventures to be able to leverage resources, leverage expertise, and address the needs that we see. Sometimes the needs are location specific. A lot of what my directorate is talking about these days is place-based innovation, right? And so thinking about sort of that location specific context too, I think can be really valuable, because ultimately it feeds into a sort of national narrative and framing that we want to adopt too. For example, we at NSF ran this thing that we called the Vital Prize Challenge over the course of the last year and a half or so, where we specifically partnered with 3 foundations, Gates, Schmidt, and Walton, and we were seeking to try to be able to accelerate, you talk about accelerate, transform, and scale, the ATS initiative. We were seeking to try to be able to see, could we take ideas coming out of the lab, and could we accelerate the hardening and maturing of those technologies in real-world contexts so that they could be deployed into classroom settings or informal learning environments as well, much more effectively and with much greater speed than what we're able to do right now. And so I think that notion of, and having that philanthropic perspective to give rise to here are the 2 or 3 questions that we want to pose to the community, and then also having that perspective when it came to judging the prize challenge submissions and getting to winners that we wanted to select at the end of the day was incredibly valuable. And then the third piece is, and this is something that I think is near and dear to my heart in the TIP directorate in particular, sometimes people confuse the T in TIP for translation, right? So they sometimes they've said, Erwin, is it translation innovation partnerships? Is it technology innovation partnerships? But that confusion, I don't have a lot of heartburn over that confusion, because part and parcel of what Congress mandated TIP to do is to really think about how do we translate solutions into practice. And in this space, I think a good chunk of that is also how do we not only translate, but how do we scale into practice what it is that we're trying to be able to do? What are we seeing coming out of the research environment that's being supported through STEM education at NSF, through IES, through others? and how do we really think about the scalability of those? And so we've just initiated a conversation with a number of potential partners around, we have SBIR for startups and small businesses. We at NSF with TIP now have a new program, POSE, Pathways to Enable Open Source Ecosystems for open source models and software and even educational innovations in the open source space. But what is that sort of translational or scaling pathway that we should be thinking about in the education space? What's the SBIR equivalent for education? Because it's not always about commercialization in this environment. How do we help provide the resourcing and the training and the support structures to be able to help folks take those ideas and realize them at scale in much the way that we saw CS for All realize to some degree of scale. And so I think that's something that's front and center for us. It will take resourcing from Congress, but I think we're really excited about this as sort of next steps going forward.
Amazing, and that's where we see, critical programs like EIR and others fit in, and I love we talked a lot about, we're obviously with the Alliance for Learning Innovation, we've talked a lot about innovating in classrooms and schools and communities. You all are innovating inside of the federal government, and I just want to applaud, that is very hard to do sometimes, and you are doing an amazing job, so thank you for your leadership. And thank you to both of you for being here. You help to illuminate how critical education R&D is for our competitiveness, for our nation's prosperity, and for the support of all of our nation's students. And we're really grateful for you for being here and giving your time to share more with this amazing audience. I also want to give a sort of a quick plug to Jeff Weld, who's in the room. If you want to go deeper on the connection between STEM and education R&D, Jeff has a wonderful paper that you can find on the Ally Coalition website, in addition to all of the task force briefs. But again, thank you for your leadership and thank you for being here with us today.